So my original game plan was to do separate reviews of each of these movies, like give each of these their own individual reviews all throughout the year. But I noticed that a lot of them had reoccurring patterns. Some of them are superhero movies, some of them are influenced by video games, they have elements of action or science fiction. But the biggest connecting factor is that they're all 2000s movies that I thought, okay, that's a general theme that can kind of string all these together in one movie marathon video. Haven't done one of these in a while, since last October. So let's talk about 8 movies in one video. This is the movie marathon of bad 2000s movies. So just like the last one of these I did, we're going to go in order of release for each of the movies. So we're going to go from 2002 all the way to 2008. First up, we have Ballistic, Ecks vs. Sever. If you're not familiar with this movie was known for being so bad that it had a big fat goose egg of a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes for a very, very long time. When I first heard the title, I thought, is this movie based on some obscure fighting game that I'd never heard of? But I did some digging, and interestingly enough, there was a game made to tie into the movie, but it was released before the movie came out, and the game was originally based off of one of the early drafts of the script, meaning that the game came out much different than the movie itself. This isn't the only movie that has a weird video game tie-in, no. There's another one later that we're going to get to. So, Ballistic, Ecks vs. Sever. This came out at a very interesting time for action movies. This came out in 2002. This was shortly before we got stuff like the Bourne Identity movies and Taken. Any movie buffs out there, you know how after 1999 there were a bunch of movies that were trying to do the, sweeping 360 shots and slow motion, fast motion, and, people shooting bullets all the time, trying to copy the bullet time effects from The Matrix. This movie is one of those. The two main actors here are Antonio Banderas and Lucy Liu. And, okay, as for the plot, Antonio Banderas plays Ecks and Lucy Liu plays Sever. They don't really fight that much in the movie. I mean, they fight once. When they first come across each other, they have this big fight scene, and then they both run off in different areas. They go on their computers, look up some code, find out about the other person, and then they basically go, hey, we're after the same guy. We're on the same team now.
Who's running the task force now? Nobody. We're suspended pending an inquiry. Which means I probably shouldn't be watching you doing this.
So why is it called Ecks vs. Sever? They're on the same team. Antonio Banderas' character is some kind of former agent who used to be the best at what he did, but now he's hitting on hard times because he lost his wife years ago. And so a couple of guys from some government organization come to him and say, hey, there's this bad guy on the loose. We want you to help take care of him. If you help us, we'll give you key information to help find your wife. Now, one of my favorite things about this scene is that this scene is taking place in a bar late at night, and there are no background extras.
Hello, Ecks. I need to talk.
It's like an asylum movie. They couldn't even afford background extras. And the thing with Antonio Banderas' character is that all throughout the movie, yes, I get it. He's supposed to be kind of washed up, and he's been out of the game for a while. He's not really good at what he does anymore, and he needs to get back into it. One of the first scenes where him and Lucy Liu interact, he punches her, and then he goes, ow. This is one of our main characters in this action movie, and he's allegedly the best fighter that these government guys could find. And as for Lucy Liu, she's supposed to be this badass stoic fighter who can take on virtually anyone that gets in her way.
Hey, beautiful, what? Oh, my nose!
If you want to have a character like that, you gotta have them have at least some inkling of personality. Like Liam Neeson's character from Taken, you establish that, you know, he's been in the Secret Service, that he has experience as a bodyguard. He obviously has a bunch of fighting experience. So that way you get to know a little bit about him, and you also establish some of his family connections, that he hasn't really been there for his daughter or his family. That's why he's divorced. You get to know that character. You don't really get to know that much about Lucy Liu's character other than she's apparently an awesome fighter. Lucy Liu is good at playing charismatic characters. She is a fucking plank of wood in this movie. She has no emotion whatsoever. She is a Terminator. She can fucking knock anyone on their ass, blow anyone away, and just be completely blank and emotionless.
You kill me, you kill Gant's son.
But then they try to establish that, oh no, she's actually a caring person, because all throughout the movie you have it that she occasionally looks at this picture, and then you find out that that's her child. And I did find this funny. At the end of the movie, when Lucy Liu's character just disappears and Antonio Banderas is left to explain what happened to some officials, like some cops, they ask him if she's a killer, and he says, no, she's a mother.
So where's our mysterious killer?
She's not a killer.
Then what is she? A mother.
Because, as we all know, there's no way you could be both a mother and a killer, especially considering earlier in the movie she turned a city street into a fucking war zone. In terms of storytelling, this movie breaks a very important rule, and that's show, don't tell. This is one of those movies where they just tell you everything. They keep talking about how Antonio Banderas is some kind of awesome fighter, keep talking about this bad guy that they have to go up against, but they don't really show him that often. He's just a generic bad guy who's into the black market, I guess. Like, they really don't explain it that well. All you need to know is that he's connected to both Ecks and Sever, because you find out that he separated Antonio Banderas from his wife by faking each of their deaths by planting bombs in two separate cars. So Antonio Banderas sees a car blow up and thinks that his wife is dead, and his wife saw a car blow up and thought that he died. So he basically masterminded this whole thing to convince them that they were dead while they were alive the whole time. And he has something to do with this child who Lucy Liu kidnapped. It's so stupid. And unfortunately, this kind of becomes a very similar plot beat in another movie we're going to be talking about later tonight. Some of these dumber things I can probably look past if the movie actually had a good balance of action or story, because that's my big deal when it comes to action movies. It's okay if an action movie doesn't have a great story as long as the action is cool, or if the action isn't all that cool, maybe it has a really interesting story to carry it. This movie doesn't even do that. Like I said, the story, if it's not boring, it's just dumb, and it explains way too much and doesn't show all that much, and when it does show that much, most of the action is just reminding me of much better movies like The Matrix, because that's the way they film all these fight scenes. There are several times in this movie where characters get shot and they act like it was some kind of minor graze. Like, instead of like flailing for dear life or acting like they just got shot with a bullet, everyone just kind of goes, ugh. Characters in Monty Python sketches react more naturally than these people did. Moving on to the next movie, we're talking about 2003's Daredevil. When this movie came out, it was considered one of the worst comic book movies of all time, but in recent years, it feels like people have kind of softened towards it, and I think that definitely helps with the director's cut. And a lot of information came out after the fact that there was lots of studio meddling involved, and the studio kept telling them to do things a certain way, to cut certain things out. And seeing the theatrical version of the movie, yeah, it's definitely apparent that that's what they were doing. As a person who likes the Daredevil comics but never really kept up with every single issue of it, I will say that There are some things that I like, and there's things that I don't like.
She asked me if I wanted to stick around for some fun. Anything that happened after that was entirely consensual.
Are you aware that perjury is a crime, Mr. Casada?
What I did like was I thought the first half actually did a good job portraying Daredevil's origin story. Considering that Daredevil wasn't really getting that much representation at the time, you know, unlike people like Batman and Superman who have been represented in old black and white serials and theatrical films and animated series, Daredevil didn't really have that much. So the fact that they went into his origin story, I actually did like that part of it. Even though I think that they tried a little too hard to cram too many villains into the movie, I did like the guys playing the villains. I liked Michael Clark Duncan playing the Kingpin. I thought he did a good job playing up the whole, you know, oh, he can dress really classy and sophisticated, but you get on his bad side, that dude will fuck you up. I thought he did a really good job at that. And even though I'm not like the world's biggest Colin Farrell fanboy or anything, I thought Colin Farrell was delightfully hammy and over the top with his performance. Speaking of the villains, that's where one of my criticisms comes in. And I say this as someone who sees Spider-Man 3 as a guilty pleasure. I feel like they tried cramming too many villains into one movie. Now, it feels like they did try to wrap it up a little too neatly, especially at the end, having it that the Kingpin just gets arrested. I mean, thematically, it does make sense that, you know, Bullseye is hired by the Kingpin to kill Elektra's father, and Elektra is obviously the love interest for Daredevil, but he ends up getting her killed, so then Daredevil wants to seek revenge. Then he goes after Bullseye, and then he finds out that he was hired by the Kingpin, so then he goes to get vengeance on the Kingpin, and instead of killing him, he ends up having him thrown in jail.
Police say that although there were no eyewitnesses, they suspect Daredevil was the one to bring Fist to justice.
Wait a minute, did you hear that? There were no eyewitnesses.
It's in black and white. How can you be a skeptic?
I get the connection of all these story beats, but it just feels like it was wrapped up a little too neatly. Then you get to the performances. Like I said, I liked the villains. Ben Affleck as Daredevil, I thought was okay. I didn't think he was fantastic in the role, but I also didn't really see anything other than Ben Affleck. I mean, you know, when you see great performances, when you see Christopher Reeve playing Superman, you see him as Superman. Look at Batman. You look at Michael Keaton as Batman. He did a really good job. I'm sorry, seeing Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner playing Daredevil and Elektra in this, I was just like, oh, that's Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner together.
Stop hitting me.
Okay. My name's Elektra Nachos.
Not that they did a terrible job or anything. I mean, they did decently in the movie, but I don't know. They didn't really stick out in the same way that some of those other performances as well-known superheroes did, at least not to me. I'll end this section on a positive note. One thing I did think was mostly good in this movie was the action. I thought there was some really cool action scenes in this movie. To wrap up my thoughts on Daredevil, the theatrical cut, yeah. The director's cut, definitely better. If you're gonna watch a version of this movie, definitely watch the director's cut. That was so much better.
No proof that your so-called Daredevil was involved, nor that he even exists. Got it?
Next up, we have an incredibly pointless sequel to two really good superhero movies, and that is the incredibly pointless Blade Trinity. Now, before I watched this movie, I did a little bit of research on IMDb trivia and a couple of other websites, and from what I can tell, this movie pretty much exists because Wesley Snipes' fame was kind of dwindling at that point, so he decided, hey, let's just make a sequel to those two really popular vampire superhero movies that I did. I just gotta say, that feeling of we're just making this so that we can fuel actors' egos and also make some money on the side, that whole attitude reeks off of this movie. Wesley Snipes, this entire movie, seems like he does not give a shit.
He hates me, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Yes, I know that part of the appeal of the character of Blade was that he was kind of dark and mysterious. You know, that was what made the first two movies work, but they still remembered that there was a character in there. There was times where he cut loose, he smiled, you know, he was able to, you know, get along with other people. In this movie, he seems like he's so uninterested. And
you amateurs are supposed to be helping me? You? Look at you. You're kids. What the fuck is wrong with you? You think this is a joke? You think this is a fucking sitcom?
it's mainly because he was. I found so many juicy stories of what happened when they were making this movie. It's not just that the character of Blade feels distant because that's the way they wrote it. It's because that's how Wesley Snipes really was when they were working on this thing. A lot of times, when you get to film franchises that get past a second one, if you have a lackluster third one, you know that most of the sequels are probably just going to start going downhill from there. And I feel like if there was even more Blade movies after this that were in the same continuity, it would have just gone downhill even faster, because this movie just screams unnecessary third entry. I mean, you got some interesting stuff going on here. You have it that vampires have finally developed technology so that they can actually walk out in sunlight. And there's a ton of juvenile humor in this one to try and appeal to the younger demographic. Mainly because you got two co-stars this time.
I was born later out of wedlock. When I came of age, I tracked my dad down and I told him I wanted in. Been doing it ever since.
Her whole thing is that she's an awesome fighter, but she can only do awesome fight scenes when she puts in her earbuds and listens to music on her iPod.
She's making playlists. She likes to listen to MP3s when she hunts. It's like her own internal soundtrack, you know?
I mean, shit, if I want to see a movie that's pretty much designed to be a cheap Apple commercial, I'd watch Sex Tape again. As for the other co-star, we have early 2000s Ryan Reynolds, before Hollywood really knew what to do with him. Early 2000s Ryan Reynolds just could not catch a break. I mean, like, he was usually one of the better characters in crappy movies. I wouldn't say this one because, oh my god, they did not use Ryan Reynolds correctly this time. I mean, the man is clearly perfect for something like Deadpool, and I liked Free Guy, but in the early 2000s, it was either you make him the pretty boy who occasionally has a smart-ass remark in romantic comedies, or you put him in sex comedies like Van Wilder, and then by the late 2000s, 2010s, that was when they started to try and put him into different stuff. I mean, obviously this one was early 2000s, but then that was when he started doing Green Lantern. And as someone who really likes Ryan Reynolds and always thought he was pretty funny, and even in bad movies, he would usually be one of the few things that I actually liked. He is terrible in this movie.
You made a goddamn vampire Pomeranian? Somehow I don't picture you teaching karate at the local Y. I can tell you two things. One, your hairdo is ridiculous. Like typical vampires, her fangs are located in her vagina. I ate a lot of garlic. And I just farted. Silent but deadly. You see that tickle that you're feeling in the back of your throat right now? That's atomized colloidal silver. It's being pumped through the building's air conditioning system, you cock-juggling thunder cunt!
And it's even weirder because you have some really bizarre cameos from people. Case in point, there's a scene where you have a cameo from Patton Oswalt, of all people, and I'm like, what the hell are you doing in this movie, Patton Oswalt? You're funny.
Not into a bat or a wolf or anything like that, but another human with practice could be possible. Because he wouldn't have a traditional skeletal structure, something more like a snake's with thousands of tiny bones.
I have a question about that, Hedges. Have you ever been laid?
The thing that really annoys me, though, you have an awesome villain in this movie. You have Dracula, and yet for some reason he doesn't do much, and he kills off a bunch of wannabe goth kids in a Hot Topic type store. At that point, the movie just kind of delved into some mediocre action scenes, and most of it is obvious CG and not a lot of great stunt work this time around. There are several points where you can clearly tell that it's really crappy CG, or you can tell that it was a stunt double, because there are plenty of times where they don't even try to hide the guy's face. You're like, that is not Wesley Snipes.
Stone Bridge overpass.
Laziness and incompetence. Those are the two words that I kept thinking about this whole movie. I'm like, man, that's just disappointing, because I did really like the first two Blade movies, and this, you know, nobody cared, especially not Wesley Snipes. He was clearly just doing this as a vanity project and an easy paycheck. Just the entire thing, I was like, you know, nobody's heart was really in this. And while people tried to hold this struggling production together, this was just unnecessary as hell. Oh, and I also got to bring up that there are several alternate endings to this movie, because the big conflict is there's a virus going on that could potentially kill all vampires, and that includes Blade. So there's one ending where you think that the bad guys are still alive, and that, oh, Blade is actually still alive and he'll be able to kick some more ass another day. And there's one alternate ending where you think that Blade has just become evil, vampire, primal, feeding off of humans like all the other bad vampires were. At the end of the day, I'm so glad that that didn't result in another sequel, because I can't stress enough, this movie was as pointless as it was. Considering what happened in Daredevil, maybe you could do an interesting Elektra spin-off movie. Maybe you could have it that she wants to get back with Matt Murdock, since she's not actually dead. But no, Ben Affleck was, I guess, too busy or didn't want to do it because he's not in it. Okay, so you can't do that. Have it that she wants to get revenge and try to get Colin Farrell, because he survived at the end of Daredevil. Apparently Colin Farrell was either too busy or didn't want to do it, because he doesn't show up at all. Really, I don't even know how to describe the plot to this thing. I mean, they bring back Elektra, she studies martial arts, and she's being pursued by some evil ninja organization, and these ninjas are some kind of mystical ninjas to where if you beat them up, they turn into gas.
Get back! Get back, go! There'll be more coming. What's coming next will be worse.
As for side characters in this thing, you have a family that Elektra is pretty close with. They're like a neighboring family, and it just so happens that the dad is grieving because his wife and the mother of his daughter is dead. So they already do that cliche.
What did you tell my dad? Did you tell him I broke into your house?
Yeah, because you did break in.
Well, you didn't have to tell him. I thought you were cool.
I'm not.
Yeah, no kidding. Now he's on my case. You need to come ask you to have Christmas dinner with us.
They actually find a way to make it even more cliche. It turns out that she's actually part of some greater prophecy, and that she's going to be, basically, they don't actually say this, but they're implying that she's basically going to be the next Elektra.
They call her the Treasure. She was a prodigy from 4 or 5 years old. Word got around fast. The Hand wanted her for themselves. They tried to steal her. Her father spirited her away.
For a majority of the time this movie was going on, it was just so dull. Like, I seriously couldn't pay that well of attention. I remember watching this years and years ago with my buddy Gus for a video that he was working on at the time, and he did his own review of Elektra, and just like I did my own review of Catwoman, and he also did his own video talking about Catwoman. And, well, we brought up an interesting quandary, and I want to give my opinion on this. I think that production-wise, Elektra is better than Catwoman. I think that this movie in terms of its special effects and the way it's edited, I think it's done better than Catwoman, because Catwoman was just so bad. It had horrible effects, all the terrible CG of Halle Berry running around and the terrible like sweeping city shots that look like something from a PS2 game cutscene. That was bad. This movie doesn't really have anything on that level. So production-wise, this one is way better than Catwoman. However, I would argue that Catwoman was a more entertaining movie in terms of how bad it was. I mean, I feel like within a couple hours from now, I'm only going to remember bits and pieces from Elektra. I can remember a ton of stuff that happened in that movie. All the terrible cat puns, all the stupid like, oh, she's a cat now, so she jumps from a coffee table to bookshelf and she scarfs down tuna and sushi. The love interest who seems pretty oblivious to the fact that the same woman he's dating is Catwoman. Bad comedy relief with Alex Borstein. The fact that Sharon Stone was the bad guy and she was, married to this guy who ran a cosmetics company and she created this cream that would basically turn your face into solid marble. I remember so many things about Catwoman, but that can't be said for Elektra. So that's where it breaks off. In terms of which movie was made better, I would argue Elektra was a way better movie in terms of the way it was made. But in terms of entertainment value, I would say that Halle Berry's Catwoman was a more entertainingly bad movie. Jennifer Garner, again, I feel mean for having to harp on her all the time, because I don't hate her, I don't think she's that bad an actress, but this, along with so many other movies that she's in, I'm just like, she did a fine job, but the material that she's given is terrible. Before we move on to the next movie, and just before I forget, this was the other movie that had the weird video game tie-in. They were going to make a video game tie-in for this movie, and it wouldn't be until a bunch of like Lego Marvel and Capcom Marvel fighting games that we'd actually get to see Elektra as a playable character. And those weren't even standalone Elektra games. Before we talk about the story itself, because I really don't have that much to add to it, I want to set up the people behind this movie, the production company and the director, because they have quite interesting backgrounds. The director of this movie is Kurt Wimmer, and if that name's not familiar, he directed a movie called Equilibrium. I feel like this with a lot of movies. Another example is movies like Moulin Rouge. I liked Equilibrium. I didn't love it as much as some other people did, but I did like it. That being said, even if you don't like Equilibrium, you're gonna fucking hate Ultraviolet. The company behind this movie is Screen Gems, and if you're not familiar with their work, they're a subsidiary of Sony. And I mean, while this is the company that has big franchises like Underworld and Resident Evil, it's also the same studio that churns out generic crap like the Slender Man 2018 movie and that dumb Techno-Fear movie, Untraceable. Yeah, same company. I thought it was important to bring up Kurt Wimmer and Equilibrium and Screen Gems and Resident Evil. It feels like this movie was the unwanted child of those two movies getting together after a one-night stand. Even down to the lead actress. It's the same lead actress from the Resident Evil movies. She runs around in leather, fights a bunch of guys, whether it's shooting guns or, fisticuffs and getting into a bunch of fight scenes. And the main plot consists of her trying to get from point A to point B, taking on bad guys, and trying to find a cure for some kind of disease outbreak that's turning people into monsters. In the Resident Evil movies, it's a disease that turns people into zombies. In this movie, it basically turns people into vampires. They don't call them that, but, they become weakened by sunlight, they become incredibly pale, and the Equilibrium connection comes in that the movie is not only a science fiction film, but it also has connections to real life events, specifically World War II. Like in Equilibrium, one of the biggest things about that movie is that the bad guys are supposed to be an obvious pastiche for the Nazi party. They have a flag that's red with a white circle and has like a black X across. It's clearly supposed to be their version of a swastika. They basically do the same thing in this movie.
The medical establishment took it upon itself to protect its public. At first, requiring victims to wear identifying armbands, then rounding them up in special camps and facilities.
And there's also a thing where she has to take a kid with her because allegedly this kid has some kind of strand in his genetics that...
Blood is swarming with cultured antigens that would kill all of us on contact. If they atomize its tissues into the atmosphere, it would be like insecticide to people like you and me.
The fact that she was taking this kid along with her was just giving me flashbacks to Ballistic. And it's like, oh no, Lucy Liu kidnapped a kid, and now this chick has to drag around a kid because allegedly he can cure people's vampirism.
Put something into your blood. He grew something there. And whatever that is, those antigens, they may hold the key to saving my life, but they were put there first and foremost to kill me. To kill me and everyone like me.
So, these men?
Yeah, Six. They're after you.
There's bad guys chasing after them. They're trying to endanger the kid because they don't want them finding this cure. This whole thing of this kid is basically supposed to be some chosen one who, oh, he's going to be the thing that helps save the world. And, you know, there's all these bad guys that are trying to collect him because he's the one, and they're going to use him for messed up experiments to try and find the cure or stop the cure from happening. It's sad that that storyline was done better in Zoolander 2, and Zoolander 2 was also not very good. And at least in Zoolander 2, you had Will Ferrell's character at one point step up and point out how stupid that whole plot point was, and reveal that it was all bullshit. This movie wants to be taken seriously, and I couldn't.
You got hemo blood on me. It is on.
Back to what I said earlier with Ballistic. Okay, maybe the story's not very strong, maybe the action is pretty cool. No, the action is just a bunch of paint-by-numbers, mid-2000s action crap that... not even cool. And don't get me started on the chase scene. The chase scene in this fucking Spy Kids 3 looked better than this.
All those still out there who spread oppression, injustice, and hatred. They better hope not.
Done with Ultraviolet. Let's move on to the next one. Let's see Nicolas Cage's attempt at joining a superhero franchise with Ghost Rider. Now, I remember back in 2007, when this movie was coming out, I remember so many people said that this was either one of the worst comic book movies ever made or one of the worst superhero movies ever made. I remember hearing just so many bad things. I heard some people say, oh man, it's so bad it's laughably bad, or oh, you gotta go see it for yourself. Similarly to Daredevil, I like the fact that this is a superhero movie based on a superhero who wasn't really getting as much representation as some of the other big names in comics at the time. You know, it's a very cool idea for a character. You know, it's a motorcyclist straight out of hell who's basically the devil's assassin, who has a skull for a head that's on fire, rolling around on a motorcycle and whipping around chains like a lasso. That's awesome. And hey, apparently Nick Cage was a big fan of the comics and he wanted to be a part of it. Apparently it was going to come down to either him or Johnny Depp. And honestly, while Nick Cage does give a slightly more reserved performance in this movie, and it would have been awesome to see some crazy Nick Cage-isms in this, I thought he did okay. I think the only thing that I didn't really buy in the movie is his hair. It was so obviously fake.
What's going through your mind right now?
You look really good. I've seen you on TV. You know, I watch a lot of TV, and you do a really good job.
You know what? I'm sorry. Most of the stuff with Ghost Rider, as cheesy and as, you know, insane as it was, you know, just to have this, you know, awesome looking visual of a bike rider with a skull that was on fire kicking the shit out of some bad guys and, you know, putting bad guys and creeps in their place. I enjoyed it. Some of that stuff was awesome.
Thanks.
Look into my eyes. Your soul is stained by the blood of the innocent. Feel their pain.
Some of the other things that I liked in the movie include Sam Elliott because who doesn't love Sam Elliott? I mean, I will say though, the one thing I didn't care about for his character is the fact that they try to set it up as a twist. At one point he talks about like, oh yeah, before you, there was the last Ghost Rider, and I'm thinking it's him. The fact that he knows about this, it's like that twist in Aragon where Jeremy Irons' character is like, oh, I fought alongside Dragon Riders, and then, oh, it turns out he was a Dragon Rider. Same thing here. He knows about the legend of the last Ghost Rider before Johnny Blaze. He's obviously the last Ghost Rider. Other than that, I mean, Sam Elliott does a pretty good performance. Although, I gotta say, the puns that are in this, oh my god. Like Sam Elliott, when he comes across him, he calls him Bonehead. Haha. And there's one where he finds him in a graveyard and he's like, how you doing, Ryder? You feeling okay? And then Nick Cage says something like, well, I feel like my head's on fire, but other than that, I'm all right. That's one of the weaker things about this movie. Some of the dialogue is so on the nose and so cheesy and dumb. It's like, okay, yeah, that was bad. There's also a love interest in the movie, because of course there is. She's played by Eva Mendes, and as hot as she is, her character is just basically kind of one note. She basically plays it like a poor man's Lois Lane. Like, she's supposed to be a news reporter who eventually falls in love with this guy who has a secret.
Almost kill yourself on the highway so you can ask me out and then you don't show. Then you keep my picture, but when I kiss you, you try to shove me out the door. What's going on?
They do that thing that you see in a lot of movies where the guy has a secret, he can't reveal it to the girl, he tries to reveal it to the girl, but she doesn't believe him, she thinks he's crazy, and then she actually sees it play out, and then the bad guys decide, oh, we're going to use her to try and lure out the good guy for the big final third act fight. And sure enough, yeah, she eventually gets taken and put into a comatose state and used as bait to get Johnny Blaze to come after the bad guy.
You don't work for my father anymore. You work for me. Get the contract from the caretaker. Bring it to me in San Venganza. And maybe I'll spare your girl's life. And Johnny? Don't make me wait.
Basically what the bad guys are in this are a fallen angel and his boys, his posse, I guess, consisting of other fallen angels, but they're also supposed to represent the elements. They're a bunch of fallen angels, and their leader has a big falling out with Mephistopheles, the devil himself, played by Peter Fonda, who, man, it was a weird year to be Peter Fonda, because he was in this and he was also in Wild Hogs. Why? Because he was the original Easy Rider, and these are motorcycle movies, so of course you got to get Peter Fonda. And he was just hamming it the fuck up in this movie.
Would you be willing to make a deal?
Name your price.
Your soul.
Even though he's not in the movie that long, and he's obviously the token best friend character who ends up dying, I like Donald Logue's character. Every once in a while he had some good interactions with Nicolas Cage. I thought his character was pretty interesting, even though he obviously ends up dying near the end. And Nick Cage does not seem that invested. I mean, yes, he's on a time crunch in the third act, but Nick Cage sees his dead body, and then just keeps running. It's like, okay, way to honor your dead friend. I'll end the Ghost Rider section by talking about one cool thing and one not cool thing. The not cool thing is, slowly but surely, Ghost Rider ends up taking out all these guys by their element. And then just when you think that, oh shit, he might not have the upper hand because he's going up against the guy who's supposed to have water powers, he still finds a way to beat him anyway. And I'm like, really? But I will say this. Coolest thing in this movie? Seeing the two Ghost Riders, seeing Nick Cage and Sam Elliott tearing across the desert, on the way to their fight. And, Nick Cage, Johnny Blaze on motorcycle with flames trailing behind, and Sam Elliott riding on a skeleton horse and, flame trailing behind him.
That's right.
Awesome visual. That was easily one of the coolest things in the movie. Max Payne is obviously based off of the video game of the same name, and, well, you could definitely make a good Max Payne movie, but no, this one wasn't. this came out at a time when people didn't know how to make good video game movies. And people can laugh about, you know, oh yeah, Super Mario movie, you know, it's a kid's movie, blah, blah, blah. It was still one of the better video game movies we've had in forever, man. I mean, when this kind of shit was coming out, this movie honestly feels like an Uwe Boll movie with a budget. Like, this feels like an Uwe Boll movie if it was put out by a major studio and had pretty big name actors and not people who were just desperate for work. What they did was they took a game like Max Payne that has a really interesting story and has really interesting characters, and while they took a lot of the core elements of the plot, they just turned it into a garden variety generic action cop drama, basically. And you've got some good talented people in here, you know, playing both the main characters and some of the supporting characters. You know, you got big name actors like Mark Wahlberg, and while he does give a better performance here than he did in The Happening, that's not saying much. Got some other people in there like Mila Kunis, and you know, you got some people who did give some decent performances, Beau Bridges and Chris O'Donnell. I haven't seen this guy in that many movies, and I know he clearly tried to branch out and become an actor, but fucking ludicrous, man. In this movie, seeing him try to play a New York cop, that shit was embarrassing, dude. That was bad.
Detective Max Payne? Jim Rivera, Internal Affairs. I need you to come with me.
Now?
Yeah, now.
I mean, they basically took the general plot about a cop who had lost his wife and baby to a bunch of junkies, and these junkies are basically pawns by this evil drug-dealing kingpin and his associates who are planning to create some kind of drug that will eventually kill people. All the while, you got Max Payne running around being mysterious, and, you know, Ludacris is trying to go after him, you know, because they had some kind of falling out, and they're part of the police force. Everyone's telling Max Payne to get back in the game and to, you know, do a better job as a cop.
It means that with your follow-through on unsolved murders, I don't have much hope for that girl in the alley. Is that what you think? That I didn't work Michelle's case? I did everything. Everything. He's still out there somewhere. One of them is still out there. That's everything.
You got Mila Kunis, who was hired by some Russian gangsters to go after him, and then they eventually start working together. I appreciate the fact that Mila Kunis didn't even try to do a Russian accent, because I could only imagine how bad that would have been. Everyone in the town seems to know that Max Payne is a bad motherfucker and you don't mess with him.
See if they know anything about a detective Max Payne.
Max Payne.
What?
Max Payne, he's been hunting. 3 years of kicking down doors. He's looking for something that God wants to stay hidden.
It makes me think, okay, they could have easily gone to the guy who wrote the original stories for the Max Payne games, and he could have easily made an interesting Max Payne movie. Maybe he could have translated it so much better than these people did. It doesn't even capture the style of the games. The games have clear influence on, you know, vintage cop noir stories and a little bit of some, you know, martial arts influence in there too. This movie just comes off like every generic action cop movie with just bleak visuals all throughout. It's interesting. Whereas Ballistic felt like it was the poor man's Matrix, in a weird way, this movie kind of felt like poor man's Constantine. Ironic. Both movies that had Keanu Reeves in them. Even at the end, when, you know, it seems like the bad guys have won and they, you know, inject Max Payne with the drug, which ends up making him snap and he goes on a killing spree taking out the bad guys in the process. Even that wasn't fun. Like, I mean, it was fun just to see this insane visual of Marky Mark screaming to the heavens while it looks like hell erupts behind him, but it wasn't enough. Seriously, either watch Constantine or hell, if you want a better Max Payne movie, just watch a highlight reel of all the cutscenes from the Max Payne games, and I guarantee you it'll be a better Max Payne movie than this was. Before we move on to the last movie of the night, I find it interesting that I forget the actress's name, but it's this Russian actress who plays this woman who's trying to seduce Max Payne, And she basically played, I mean, it's not supposed to be the same character, but she basically did the same thing in 2 other movies that I can think of. She did it in another video game movie, Hitman. She also did it in Quantum of Solace, you know, one of the Daniel Craig James Bond movies.
Like this, you can make love to her just like she never left. Oh, Max, I miss you.
Get out.
Excuse me?
I said, get out now.
I just found that weird. She's playing like, you know, a prostitute or something like that. She's trying to seduce and have sex with the main character, and then they just leave. And lastly, we have the comic book movie, The Spirit. Now, the reason that this movie came into existence is obviously because Sin City was very popular, and that was based on the Frank Miller comics. Frank Miller helped direct that movie along with Robert Rodriguez, and so then we got this movie, which is clearly taking a lot of its cues from that. I remember when the second Transformers movie came out, and a lot of people said, well, with the first Michael Bay Transformers, you could tell that Steven Spielberg definitely had a hand in helping to make this movie, and made it just slightly better than you'd expect. But then the second movie, you know, Steven Spielberg was out of the picture, and it was all Michael Bay's doing. And needless to say, that movie sucks. But I feel like something kind of similar happened here. In Sin City, you could tell that Robert Rodriguez was helping Frank Miller make that movie. Here, Robert Rodriguez is nowhere to be found, and it feels like Frank Miller had a lot of free range to make this movie. Clearly what this movie and the comics that inspired it were trying to do was obviously do a play off of old mystery serials. And it does take things from the comics. I mean, you have one of the main villains at play here. You have the octopus. But instead of making, you know, a character who's hidden in shadow and you only see like his hand every so often, they decide to show his face. And for some reason he's played by an incredibly hammy and over-the-top Samuel L. Jackson.
Toilets are always funny.
I just want to point out, this is a comic book movie, and not only do you have Sam Jackson, pre-Nick Fury, but you also have Scarlett Johansson, pre-Black Widow. The Spirit is this vigilante very similar to Batman in The Dark Knight. He goes around at night, fucks up some bad guys. He's often called in by the police chief, who happens to know him, and they have a clear connection.
Yeah, I see how nice you've been to my daughter. When are you planning on breaking her heart, you lounge lizard?
Lounge lizard? Where'd you get off on calling me that?
I'll call you anything I want to. Hell, I don't even know why I bother talking with you anymore.
Because we fight crime, Commissioner, and right now we got our hands full.
Oh, you noticed that, have you? I thought with all the tail you've been chasing, you might have forgotten.
Established some of his backstory, that he was killed, but then he was reborn, and just like Elektra, I was starting to get flashbacks to Halle Berry's Catwoman, because they basically do the same thing there. Do the same thing of that whole, oh, I died, but I was reborn, and I must fight crime, protect the innocent, work for world peace. That established some of the Spirit's backstory. When he was a boy, he had a best friend who was a girl. They grew older together. They fell in love. Eventually she left, and she changed. She became a bad guy. And funny enough, she happens to be played by Eva Mendes.
You were looking for a hero in his mythical armor.
The only man who would know that is dead.
The fleece. The golden fleece. Jason's golden fleece.
He's dead! You're dead! You're dead!
But she's a bad guy, and because she's a poorly written woman character in a Frank Miller story, she just wants this expensive artifact because it's shiny and because she's a gold-digging woman. And the bad guys also want it because they can inherit some kind of like Herculean power from it. And this pretty much just drags on all throughout the movie. And, you know, we get some backstory, we get some action-packed fight scenes, and you also get this Warner Brothers style comedy. Like the way they write the octopus in this movie, the way they have Sam Jackson do it, he's trying to play this Joker-like character, but...
That all you got?
For whatever weird fucking reason, if you've ever wanted to see a movie where Samuel L. Jackson and Scarlett Johansson dress up like Nazis. It happens in this movie. For some reason or other, it happens. Like I said with some of these other movies, it really does feel like this entire movie was not only style over substance, but it feels like it was trying way too hard to copy a formula that another movie did. Like, for example, Ballistic was trying too hard to be like The Matrix, and this movie was definitely trying too hard to be like Sin City. And I really liked Sin City. I really did enjoy that movie. But this one just kind of felt like an imitation of it, which is weird because it's from the same people. So that just made it a little bit more disappointing. Thematically, I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to do a satire of sorts of old detective and noir stories, and also give it like a violent update, you know, kind of update it for the comic book generation that was used to stuff like Sin City and also stuff like Dark Knight. And it's a very stark contrast. They treat some character development as, you know, seriously as possible. Like the Spirit's backstory, I actually thought was semi-interesting, but then you see, like, Sam Jackson is just a goofball most of the time, and Eva Mendes is just, you know, evil, cold-hearted woman. Really get much out of the characters aside from the Spirit, but even then, you know, he's a vigilante who fights bad guys and beats the shit out of some evil bitches running around the streets. And, you know, they even have a thing where, like, he's being interviewed by the press, and he of course does, like, the, you know, the perfect photogenic smile for the newspaper, and, you know, he's signing something for a little boy, and, you know, oh, he's just such a charming individual.
Play it straight, youngsters. Don't be too tough on your parents. They work hard. And remember, brush your teeth.
Like Sin City and a lot of stuff that you would see in Frank Miller stories, it tries to have a very cynical and nihilistic look on life, which again was reminding me a lot of the Max Payne movie, and it didn't help that I watched them back to back. But, you know, there are several points where they just keep highlighting how nasty and unpleasant the world that this movie takes place in is. You know, there's a scene where you think that the Spirit is going to die again, and there's just a bunch of people down below in the city streets just like mocking him. And
Street pizza! You look stupid. You'll believe a man can't
like I said, visually it looked interesting, and I'm friends with plenty of people who said that they thought the story itself wasn't that good and the acting wasn't that great, but they came away saying, but I did like how it looked, and I thought the style was cool. I don't know, man. Overall, I just would have preferred watching Sin City again.
Dead as Star Trek.
Now we come to the end of the video, and I have to give final thoughts and say what I thought was the best and the worst of the night. So let's see. Best movies out of the bunch, I'm going to go ahead and say Ghost Rider. There's a bunch of stupid shit in that movie that kept me entertained, and some of the awesome moments did genuinely strike me as awesome. In Daredevil, I definitely am more sympathetic towards that one, just based on the fact that it was the reason it turned out so slapdash was because it was obviously the studio interference. Easily the worst of the night goes to Ballistic and Ultraviolet. Ballistic was an action movie that had action that just made me want to watch Matrix instead, and a story that told more than it showed, and had characters that I just didn't care about, and every once in a while had something unintentionally funny, but it wasn't enough to make it a so bad it's good movie. As for Ultraviolet, it combined two things that I don't think really meshed well together. You took something like Equilibrium, which was science fiction and also had political or social commentary in there, and then you combine it with a dumb shooter beat-em-up action movie like the Resident Evil movies, and then everyone takes everything so seriously. Anyways, guys, that does it for this video and brings the Blockbuster videos for this month to a close. Tune in next time where we're going to be doing 3 reviews for June. We got 2 movie reviews, and I have another anime review in the works, so look forward to all those next month. But until then, guys, I'm Adam Sykes of the Blockbuster Show, and we will see you guys in the next video.